Okay, so I created this center activity for group 2, which are medium level readers. Now I correlated this lesson back to our standard. So the standard that the entire class will be meeting today based on Charlotte's Web is titled LAFS 3RL13, which says describe characters in a story and explain how their actions contribute to the sequence of events. Now, this activity kind of has two parts. The first part is the stations with the hats and the questions. So each hat has 3 questions, and each hat represents one of the 4 characters that we are introduced to chapter 1 of Charlotte's Web. So we have a hat for Fern, we have a hat for Avery, which is Fern's brother, we have a hat for Papa, or Mr. Arble, which is Fern's dad, and then we have a hat for Mrs. Arble, which is Fern's mother. So these questions kind of help students describe the characters. It kind of supports the second part, so I purposely wrote these questions for students to get an understanding of the characters and kind of see what they know and the information that describes each character and kind of how well they were able to do that after the first chapter, and also kind of to support their ideas in the second part of this activity. So some of the questions that I ask are let's see. Okay, so this hat's about Avery. So I said, what character traits does Avery have? So the first chapter, you learn a lot about Avery, kind of his traits that he has. For example, he seems less compassionate about animals and about things like that. He's a little bit more aggressive. Another question that I wrote was, what time does he wake up? Now this might sound like a silly question, but the second part of the standard, which says explain how characters' actions contribute to the sequence of events, this is a huge thing. So Avery wakes up late, and I actually asked the same question about Fern, is what time does she wake up? And hopefully in asking questions like these ones, students are able to kind of put 2 and 2 together during the second part of this activity and be like, oh, well, Fern woke up way earlier than Avery, and Fern is super compassionate with animals, and her dad was about to butcher a pig that was a runt, and she didn't agree with it, and she ran out and she stopped him. Where with Avery, if he got up early, he has no compassion. One of my other questions was, what did he come downstairs with? He came downstairs in the morning with a rifle and a dagger. So if he was up that early, he would have already had his rifle and his dagger out. He would have heard that his dad was slaughtering a pig, and he would have been running out with him to help his father, most likely, and this story would have never taken place about Wilbur. So hopefully with these questions, it helps kind of aid students' comprehension and helps them make connections between how characters have an influence on the main events that happen and how different characters can do or say different things that can totally change the events that take place. So that's just examples, questions of Avery's. For Fern, I have, this is Mr. Abel. Let's see, where's Fern? Okay, so what time does Fern wake up? I already mentioned that. What character traits does Fern have? Why was Fern upset with her papa at first? So those all kind of play out into the characters and the events, so it kind of goes hand in hand for the second part of that standard. Now for the second part of this activity, first of all, I asked students when they're done with the station to grab the 3 questions in each hat, put them at their group activity circle, organize them based on the characters. So when I come around to collect these questions, they're already kind of they're organized in which the questions correlate to the characters. So Miss Avery's pile is here, Fern's pile is here, and so on. So once students answer all the questions, they organize the questions into the correct piles. They are supposed to discuss and identify how the character's actions contributed to the main event. Now, I tell the students that there is one main event that we're looking at, and I really and truly believe that they will understand which main event I am talking about. It's kind of what the entire chapter was surrounded by. There weren't really other events that took place in the chapter. So I asked them to describe and identify how characters have an impact, and how if characters said or did a different thing, how the event would have been changed, and I asked them to write a few sentences about this. So that really goes hand in hand with the second part of the standard. So that is how my standard correlates to this specific activity. Now, the second thing that I want to mention in this video is how this activity goes with medium level readers. So I feel like I give a lot of support in this activity. Like I said, these questions kind of go hand in hand with the standard. It goes hand in hand with the second activity. So I try to kind of remind students what they already know, what they already read in chapter 1, and hopefully they can make those connections and put 2 and 2 together in order to help them with the second part. Now, I really don't think they need a lot of support in the first part of the standard that asks them to describe characters in a story. I think that they will have absolutely no problem with that. The part of the standard that I was most concerned for with these readers was describing how their actions contribute to the main events that take place in the story, because that could be a little tricky. So that is why the questions that I asked about the characters correlated to the events that took place in the story. So I feel like students were given enough support to kind of give them some hints and some clues of that second part of the standard. Now, the rubric that I created, so students can earn up to 20 points with this rubric. I have 4 different categories. So the first category is station work. So this is when I grade students based on the amount of stations they completed. Did they complete all 4 stations? Did they answer all 3 questions in each of the stations for a total of, 12 questions total? So if they did, they get 5 points. Now the points lower based on the amount of stations and the amount of questions they complete. So if they don't go to all of the stations, or if they don't answer all of the questions, if they answer 10 or 11 out of 12 questions, you get lowered to 4 points, and so on. So 3 points is when students answer, go to some of the stations and answers less than 10 questions, and it goes so on. So the second category is characters and events. Now this is kind of like the second part of the station in which they're graded on. So students discuss and identify the overall impact characters had in the events that conspired in the first chapter. So if students identify, discuss, and write a few sentences based on the characters and how they contributed to the events, they're able to get all 5 points. Now, if they just discuss it and they don't write it down, it's 4 points. If they discuss, and identify the characters in the story, that's 3 points, because they didn't really correlate to the events that occurred. And then if they do not discuss the characters or the events that took place in the story, that is, 1 point. The third category is teamwork. So I included this in all of my rubrics. I thought that since students were working together in groups, that it's really important to kind of push the idea of teamwork in these activities. So 5 points if all students participate and work together. So for each group, or for this group specifically, group B, I told them that if you guys want to assign kind of each role to a certain student, that's completely fine. If someone wants to be the designated, handwriter in the group, or the designated kind of like idea person, or whatever they want to do. If someone wants to be the organization person for the cards, that's fine, but everybody needs to participate. So that's 5 points if all students participate. Each the grades get lowered based on the fewer amount of people that do participate. So 4 points if most people participate, 3 points if some do, 2 points if only 2 do, and 1 point if no students participate. Now the last category is organization. So again, I thought that this was super important, and this is a really good skill for students to practice, is organization. So 5 points if work is neat and organized. So as I said, the questions should be organized based on the character that the questions are geared towards. Also, I want their handwriting to be neat. I want to be able to read their answers and ideas. So I put that down for 5 points. Now, the less organized and the less neat they are, the fewer points they get. So that is my rubric. Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the sources that I used. So I found this incredible source that mostly talked about low-level and medium-level readers, and it was amazing because it gave you different ideas for instructions. So some of them didn't really apply to this one, but Making Time for Fluency, Phonics Review, it kind of gave you ideas like use visual aids or include meaning. That was really important. Maximize reading time. What else did it give me? It gave me like ideas for centers, and it gave me like different supporting aids that you can use for medium level students. So I thought that was really important. So that is the source that I used for this station. So that concludes my explanation of my center activity for group